thank you for showing up and also for all the feedback that we've been getting from the recent webinars. We've been sending out surveys afterwards, and we are definitely using those to change and update the webinars throughout the year. We look forward to hearing from people after this one also. So take it over, Laura. Thank you for presenting today on the cloud.
Absolutely. Very excited to be here. Let me just go through a few logistics about the tool. I think most of you are probably familiar with GoToWebinar because I know you guys are doing a lot of webinars over here. Let me just quickly go through it, and then I will introduce my fearless co-presenter, and we will get underway with some good content. Just to remind you, you can listen to audio either through the computer itself, or if you prefer, you can use the telephone. So if you're hearing me right now, you're in good shape, but there's always that option if you want. If you are having trouble finding options, so finding ways to chat or finding ways to change, keep in mind that there's this little flyout bar. So if you're not seeing basically any options, if you click this orange arrow, you will see more options. And please ask us questions. Probably don't ask us what the meaning of life is. I know that it's not quite as participatory as being in a live seminar, but in fact, from a presenter's perspective, for me, it's even more important that you ask questions because otherwise I am sitting alone in my office talking to the wall, which is actually what I'm doing right now. So we love questions, definitely ask them, and we will attempt to take on everything, or at least everything we can get to. This is just a slide for people who can't currently hear me. So always have the problem that if you can't hear me, then you can't hear me introducing anything. All right. And with that, any logistical issues or questions before we get underway? You are, by the way, currently muted unless you've unmuted yourself. With the size of the group, it probably makes sense but please feel free to answer questions, ask your questions in the question box, or unmute yourself to ask out loud. So before we get underway, any technical issues or any questions? Pause for a moment to see. All right. So let's get underway. The cloud beckons, but is it safe? So there's two presenters for this. So you have me. I am Laura Quinn. I'm the executive director of Idealware. Idealware, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is we are a national nonprofit whose mission is to provide information to help nonprofits make smart software decisions. So everything from very detailed decisions like what accounting package to use to broader questions like should I be using cloud software, for instance. And I'm really excited to be here with Jeff Hogue. Jeff, can you introduce yourself? Can you unmute yourself?
Can you not hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Jeff Hogue. I'm a supervising attorney here at Legal Assistance of Western New York. And like many of you probably out there, we're looking at ways to be more collaborative and more dynamic as an organization, and at the same time, save money. So I'm really interested in the cloud, and I basically do what Idealware does for everyone else here in our program, figure out what tools we can implement and go do it. So I think it's a interesting topic, and I'm looking forward to getting it going.
Yep. And Jeff, as I think most of you probably know, has been doing in-depth research into both uses of the cloud for legal organizations and the implications of security and privacy on cloud applications. So we're really excited to have him here with us off of that perspective.
Cool, thanks.
Terrific. All right. So what are we going to cover? So we're going to start with just kind of an overview of this whole topic. So how do we think about security when it comes to the cloud? And then we'll dive down a little bit more into the nitty-gritty. So what what are the aspects of security? What might be included there? What does it mean for you, especially as a legal aid organization? We'll actually look at what you would ideally want in terms of security. So if you had infinite security, what would that mean? And then we'll come back up a level to talk about, so what practically should you be looking for as you're looking at vendors? Let's dive in. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're talking about cloud security. What is the cloud? And this is actually a somewhat nebulous term. It means somewhat different things to different people. But for the purposes of this seminar, we're going to define it simply as basically anything. So you've got your own computers, you've got your router, you've got your firewall, and then basically anything that's on the internet or on somebody else's network, we're going to define as the cloud. So basically anything beyond your network is, for our definition, the clouds. And the cloud is definitely something that people are using. LSC was gracious enough to provide some of the data from their application forms as to what people were doing with cloud-related things. So almost 50% are using, so by our definition, servers that are external, so outside their own network. 18% specifically said they were using Google Apps, and 13% said they were using Google Docs. So a lot, and those are the specific applications that that fell into the categories they're asking about. But certainly this is not a realm that nobody is thinking about in legal services. And Jeff, I suspect that you have, I know that you're using them yourself and have heard from other organizations. You want to just talk a little bit about the prevalence of using the cloud in legal services?
Well, honestly, I get probably 2 calls or emails a week from legal services providers around the country, some LSC, some not LSC, and even some other nonprofits who've heard about our use of Google Apps, who are interested in what its functionality is, and often privacy and security comes up. And I think that 18% number, it's tripled from, I think in a year.
Wow.
I think the last time I looked at that, it's definitely, that's a pretty significant increase from a few of us pioneers to something that's gaining traction. That said, as we're going to talk about, nobody should jump on board just because it's getting popular, but it's definitely,
right.
It means other people have looked at it and said, this is worth doing.
Absolutely. Yep. Certainly, and some of the reasons that people are interested in the cloud, that it's tempting for organizations, it tends to be cheaper to get into than installed software, so it tends to not have as much upfront cost, though it could have as much or more cost in an ongoing basis. Easy remote access, so the ability to get to it wherever you are, and it simplifies infrastructure. So for smaller nonprofits, it often makes sense to not need to have somebody to maintain an internal, Outlook server, but instead to have that hosted elsewhere, so you don't need the expertise. That's, for most nonprofits, it doesn't make sense necessarily to, it's at a critical point of differentiation for your services as to your ability to maintain an Exchange server. So it can be something that makes sense to outsource. So there's definitely reasons that people are looking to the cloud, and I think compelling reasons for nonprofit and legal services. But then you have almost everybody asks about security. We've, in fact, at Idealware just done a substantial look at, I think we called it the state of the nonprofit cloud. So it's basically looking at whether nonprofits were using the cloud and what their kind of perceptions and experiences were. And almost everybody surveyed and everybody we talked to mentioned the idea of security as something that was of concern or of concern to their organization. Which is probably because we hear about all of this stuff in the news. So hackers penetrating, Sony PlayStation breached, so this idea that, okay, this stuff is out on the internet and therefore is, basically, so one person in our research gave us the great quote, well, if you watch any TV or see any movies, you know that anybody can access anything on the internet at any time, which is certainly not necessarily the case. but is a fairly common perception that basically putting it out into the cloud makes it less secure. Then there's additional kind of ideas around the legal ethics of these technologies. So what are the requirements of a legal services firm to particularly to secure the data and not to distribute it? Jeff, do you want to talk just a little bit about the high-level considerations in this space?
Yeah, there was, I think it was a North Carolina bar started to take a step towards saying, uh-oh, no, anytime you store your data somewhere else, you need to have special agreement with them. That idea lasted, I think, less than a year, and lawyers and other folks said this is not how the world works. You need to rethink that. So it looks like everyone is going this direction, reasonable efforts, and then there's still some folks, an idea out there that certain kinds of data require a little more protection. That's definitely the case with the few ethics opinions we have in New York. But who knows what reasonable is until somebody gets in trouble. I think that if people apply some systematic analysis to security for the data stored in the cloud, at least to the same level that they are in programs, my guess is we're going to be able to steer clear of ethics problems. It is not the same as, taking all your client information and putting it on a poster on the outside of your building. But you need somebody who sort of understands what the general risks are. I mean, there are different cloud providers, and at the end of the day, if you choose a decent one and you use decent passwords, I think we're all going to find smooth sailing on the ethics front.
Yep. And we got a question from Cassandra, which I'll take in just a second. Just to mention as well that the language is actually strikingly similar to the HIPAA requirements for healthcare organizations. And there's been a lot of progress in cloud-enabled healthcare applications that are very, very clearly HIPAA appropriate. So I think that unless something kind of strange happens on this front, I don't think there's anything specific about cloud applications, as we'll talk about coming up, that would preclude from ethical issues.
I don't think so. And if you have someone, super paranoid about it, I think all organizations should think about giving clients notice of what their privacy and data retention policy is. We store your paper files for a certain number of years, and then we securely shred them. We store your electronic data for this amount of time. We use the internet to collaborate. We can use the internet to collaborate with you and to store files. You could do a pretty thorough entire privacy notification, and then I think that's getting closer to belt and suspenders.
Yep, great. So Cassandra asks, can you elaborate on the types of data that are generally considered to be more sensitive? Jeff, can you talk a little bit about what you would consider to be pretty sensitive data for legal services and what would be less so?
Yeah, I have found no good guidance on this, but what I'm trying to do in our own program is look at trying to draft a policy that would sort of meet HIPAA requirements or come really close. And then we need to have a discussion about what those more sensitive documents are. I'd say things that include, the DV shelter's address, somebody's medical history, incident that even if you have documents about, let's say, abuse of a minor, those kinds of things. And then, but you're more likely to actually get in trouble and have to do hard things as a program, I think, if you have a lot of financial data, because people are worried about identity theft. So, as a general rule, I'd say don't include social security numbers in people's in emails and that sort of thing. But nobody knows the answer. But those are the things that I'd look at as highly sensitive information that could get somebody really hurt, and information that could be used to steal someone's identity, because we generally don't have, trade secrets.
Yep, absolutely. And we will talk coming up about kind of thinking through prioritizing the, how secure does it need to be compared to how much are we going to pay for the security of it. So we'll talk that more down that road. Thank you for the question, Cassandra. All right, so there's these ideas that the cloud is a scary place to be. And in general, so that's because the cloud is on the internet. But that's not limited to the cloud. So if you literally have any computers connected to the internet, then you're essentially as vulnerable to attack or to theft or to those types of things as being in the cloud. So there's not a lot that's particularly specific to the cloud as opposed to so there are certainly security precautions which apply equally to the cloud and to any data that you are storing on any computer connected to the internet, which is likely to be most computers these days. So we do lots of things on the internet. So it seems scary to be on the internet, but in fact, we shop online, we put in our credit cards, we bank online. Almost all bank transactions are now done over the internet. So there are, banks are transferring, probably billions of dollars a day over the internet. We post crazy things on Facebook that we probably shouldn't post. So just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it is not secure. And in fact, we act on that belief, most of us, all the time. So I think that there is somehow a mental distinction in people's minds between storing client data on the internet and looking at your bank statements online, when in fact those are both things that need to be secure, and there's important things in both of them. And when you're doing this thought process, you also need to think through how secure your on-site data is. So simply saying, okay, it is in a file cabinet in my office does not mean that it is secure. So for instance, for electronic security, thinking about things like patching computers that are, so to make sure that you are up to date on security patches for any computers with data on them. So you need to think about passwords and permissions and what your policies are. Disaster recovery plans, what happens if your office is hit by a tornado? So has your staff had any security training? If you haven't really given much thought to any of these things, then there's no reason to suspect that your data is more secure on-site than it would be off-site. There's a lot of kind of myths in people's minds. So basically thinking like, okay, well, I'm a small nonprofit, and if I keep it in-house, then it's going to be less vulnerable than putting it out if I give it to like Amazon, on Amazon servers. They're big and they're more likely to be vulnerable to attack. Or I'm sorry, not likely to be vulnerable, but more likely to be targeted for an attack. But the fact of it is that it's often data breaches are crimes of opportunities. It's like, this burglar going around trying windows. That it's not necessarily somebody going to extreme effort to try to hack a particular organization. It's somebody who is, basically electronically testing Windows to see who is vulnerable. So just because you're small doesn't mean that somebody won't just kind of, tap your window, tap your doors to see how vulnerable you are. And so, as I mentioned, like this kind of idea that, all right, well, I've got it in my office, I can see it, I can throw my body in front of it to protect it from, whoever might want to take it, feels safer, but it is often not the reality. So here's a cloud data center. So there's things like, actually I had another picture at one point, which was literally security guards with guns standing in front of the data center. So, there's security, there's locked doors for each server cage, it's climate controlled, it's super regulated. as opposed to, I love this picture. So this is a coat closet. Here's a server. Here's a saw for some unknown reason. But if this is looking familiar to you, there's really no reason to suspect that this is a safer place to put your data than this, beautifully immaculate climate control data center, which is what most reasonably large vendors look like.
Right. If I could interject, I mean, there are several industry standards that they comply with. At one of the TIG conferences, someone was talking about a room that has this. If there's a fire, it pumps this gas. It seals all the doors and pumps this fire retardant gas in, that sort of thing. And also, I mean, we can get by with cheaper server setups, but I think you're pointing out well the issue, which is most of us aren't experts at maintaining these systems, not to the degree that the cloud providers do. And I wanted to go back to one of your previous points. When we sat down and analyzed our top security risks and looked at what has actually happened out in the world, users deleting sensitive data on purpose or by accident, hardware failure, incomplete backups, very weak passwords, Trojans, viruses, and stolen hardware. Don't forget, there are people who will walk in and carry your server out the door too, just because it's a computer. So those were the risks that we saw were the highest risk, and I'm guessing most providers are far more likely to have one of those things happen than someone using information from the cloud against a client.
And we've got a question here from Mike Monahan, which is, what do we expect from vendors who hold our data? As a consumer out there, what should we be looking for in their terms of service, or what kind of policies do we expect from them?
So it's a fabulous question, and we're going to, we have a whole section devoted to that at the end. So we're going to basically be talking through all of the different things which could be provided, and then talk about what you might expect, what is common, what you should look for, things like that. So in general, I've just made the broad sweeping statement, which I know is not necessarily a useful statement, that most credible and large vendors have very good and secure data policies. That obviously begs the question, what is a credible and large vendor, and how do you know? So we're going to get into that in a substantial amount of detail if you'll hold on to that for just a little while. And actually another a great comment from Michael. Michael is saying, so guards with guns don't do anything to protect data. So this is something else that we'll be talking through. So they don't do everything to protect data, but they do something. So they prevent the physical stealing of your servers, and they prevent physical access to put a data stick into your server. So those are potentially potential risks. They may not be the primary risks. I definitely agree with Jeff when he says that for most organizations, the primary risks are actually things that are mostly staff controlled. So things like passwords or staff giving out, so being drawn into like a scam in which someone convinces them to give them their password over the phone, something like that. Yeah. So, and Anthony's saying, please let me know how your staff gain entry to our Redwood City office. So I suspect that that's a joke about the saw and the closet. Absolutely. Terrific. So we are going to dive into kind of so that was a kind of our overview kind of mental framework, and we're going to dive down into more as to how to think about security and how to think about vendors in this space. Any questions about any of the things that we've talked about? Or Jeff, anything else to add to kind of our conceptual framework before we move forward?
I don't think so.
Terrific. We'll take Williams just posted in a link, which I suspect is a look at recommendations for security guidelines. So we'll take a look at that and repost that. All right. So I'm just going to do a very quick tour through What security? So if you talk to somebody who is an expert in security, who has done tons of security classes, and there's actually is a security, an electronic security certification, what are kind of the core aspects? So there's generally three core aspects here: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality is often what we think of first when we think of security. So that means that people who aren't supposed to get to the data can't get to the data. The data is only available to authorized parties. So that is definitely a main pillar of security, but it's not the only pillar. You've also got the idea of data integrity. So the idea that it's possible that folks with appropriate access to the data are doing inappropriate things. And integrity also has the idea of being able to track who has done what. So the idea of the idea of if a change is made, then you can figure it out to know what's been done. And you've also got the idea of availability. So within this umbrella of security is commonly considered also the idea that the data will be there when you go to get it. So the data does not go away, or the service does not go away, which is also another important consideration as you look at cloud stuff. There's one more that's not in general considered part of the three pillars, but has some potential impact specifically for nonprofit organizations, or for instance, organizations that are working with super sensitive data that, for instance, the government might go after. So this is not super likely. I'm going to actually turn it over in just a second to Jeff, who knows far more about this than I. But there is the theory that whoever has the data could say, turn it over to the government if the government issued a subpoena. So if you have physical possession of your data, then you could almost literally throw your body into the breach to protect your data, which a cloud vendor is unlikely to do. However, this is not a very likely circumstance. Jeff, you want to talk a little more about that?
Yeah, this is often really confused by folks who think, oh, well, the vendor's going to turn over my client's information in a case, as a result of a subpoena, and that's just not the case. In a civil case, you're going to be on notice of a subpoena. You can try to stop it. Just as if it was in your file cabinet. Really, we're only talking here where you would not be potentially on notice of data being taken or given is, when the government's doing it. And frankly, throwing your body in front of your file cabinet also won't do any good, because they'll probably give you a national security letter and they'll say, well, you need to come get this stuff for this secret reason, and you can't even tell anyone. And if you, resist, you'll be arrested. So the truth is, Big Brother exists, and it doesn't matter if it's on their computer, your computer. I mean, unless you're the sole practitioner, it's in a server under your desk, and when you get that letter, you burn it. That's the way it is. And frankly, if it's that sensitive, they will have found a way to hack in from the internet.
Cool. So there is this kind of in theory, but in practice, not really a core consideration.
No,
great.
Not for us. Not for us unless you're doing that kind of work, in which case you really have to think about completely alternative methods of handling data and paper.
Yep. Great. All right, Jeff, anything else to add to those just kind of general framing thoughts as to what security means before we dive into kind of how to think about security from a kind of a risk and resource needs perspective?
No, I don't think so. We'll watch the comments. I'm thinking of some things about security and servers walking out the door and sticky notes under mouse pads. But let's move on and see if we have more questions along those lines later on.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, and that is definitely something that security means to you. Like if people are writing down all their passwords, on sticky notes and putting them on our computer, then you've got other problems there.
Oh, we know that. I wish someone would give me money and I would issue the challenge. I'd put some stuff in Google Apps in a fake company and say, the race is on. Let's see how long it takes me to get into this other program, walk in the door with a polo shirt that looks like it's from a company, and I've already looked up the name of the information technologist and say, oh, Bob Smith said I needed to deliver this backup battery for your server. Guarantee you I could stick spying USB sticks into computers and get access.
Yeah.
That's for another day, I think.
Absolutely. Great. And William is posting a number of things into the chat, which looks like some opinions on kind of some framing thoughts potentially about cloud security. William, any chance that you could unmute yourself by hitting the little microphone icon and talk a little bit about kind of some of the things you're thinking here?
I just wanted to point out to the group that h-online.com is a really good aggregate site for these type of questions, and I just very quickly did a search within the site for cloud security, and you get hundreds of articles that are generally research type papers, but at least it gives you a good authoritative source to kind of answer these kind of questions.
Terrific. Absolutely. Thank you. And I just passed that on to the group.
Great.
Great. Fabulous. All right, and let's, and so you guys are doing a great job asking questions as we go, but I certainly will pause here. Any questions about any of this framing, thoughts, any comments before we dive into kind of how to think about it as an organization? You can either enter it into the questions channel, or as William just demonstrated, you can unmute yourself and ask it out loud. All right. Great. All right. So what does this all mean to you as an organization? What should you be thinking about? So if you want to be absolutely secure and ensure that no one will ever steal any data, you turn off your internet connection and you allow no one access to any of your data. So you lock yourself in a bunker, you're perfectly safe, but you can't get any work done. So let's be real. So in general, there is no way to be absolutely secure. So security is all about mitigating the risk of likely and possible things that have the worst consequences for you at the least amount of money, as opposed to saying we need to be absolutely safe. So you want to start by thinking about, as we talked about, what kinds of data you're protecting. How sensitive are they? So I feel like a lot of organizations are potentially in fact, I see both sides. So some organizations have a ton of sensitive data and don't think about it at all and have it in, they have credit card numbers sitting in paper files out on somebody's desk. I also see the opposite, organizations who think that everything they have needs to be incredibly protected when there's actually not much that's sensitive in it. We, for instance, work with foundations on thinking through grants management systems. And for the most part, there's really no sensitive information in a grants management system. It is people's proposals. It's possibly somewhat embarrassing, like it has review notes maybe, possibly somewhat embarrassing if it comes out on the, published on the internet, but there's not a lot that's super valuable or super damaging. So here's some red flags. So Jeff has already talked through some of these. Donors' credit card numbers, scanned images of checks, which could be used as to get bank account information, donors' bank account information, things like, as Jeff mentioned, medical history, abuse of a minor, domestic shelter addresses. So in general, if you are storing this stuff, you need to think of this as stuff that needs to be very secure. So these are just a kind of a crib sheet of things that definitely need to be secure, not necessarily comprehensive. Jeff, anything to add to this list?
Yeah, I think one thing I would add is conversations that you have internally about potentially getting sued yourselves, or talking about potential liability of your organization as an organization rather than clients. Those kinds of conversations about workplace behavior, discrimination, policies, that sort of thing. You might want to think about that would be more than embarrassing if that were easily findable.
Yep. Yep. Actually, I'm going to skip that one just for a second because Jeff just brought it up. So there's obviously not only the monetary value of somebody actually like stealing all your credit card numbers. There's also the impact of exposure. So in monetary terms and in reputation. So something that's going to be, as Jeff says, more than embarrassing to be public on the web is definitely going to be more important to secure than something that would just be mildly embarrassing. So to think about both the how likely is it that someone's going to be going after this information, and also how damaging would it be if it got out. So prioritizing both of those. And then you want to think about, so kind of a special consideration for a legal services organization is the idea of privilege and waiver. Jeff, you want to talk a little about privilege and waiver?
There's the idea that by storing the data on someone else's computer where they have access to it in a situation where those folks are not on your staff, well, I guess there's actually a legitimate concern that at some point, if they have access to that information and can read that information, that it might lose its privileged nature and therefore be discoverable. So a clever person could say, I want all of your emails about Jane Doe, and you say, no, that's attorney-client privilege, and they say, no, it's not, because Bob, the computer nerd, read all of them, and he doesn't work for you, so he's a third party. These have all been pretty well addressed. You can have a vendor or contractor handling your data, and that in and of itself does not destroy privilege. However, I don't think it's a terrible idea, and I think it might have been William, or maybe it was Mike Monahan, it might have been William, who initially kind of raised this issue for me. And so with a recent vendor, we added a contract, a little rider to the contract that said, just you acknowledge that you're dealing with legal data, and you can obviously access the data for the purposes of checking to make sure that it's stored correctly, and that to recover it if the data is destroyed accidentally. But if you have to tell us if you even accidentally go beyond just checking to make sure things are going fine. And so that I think is belt and suspenders, but I think I can't cite them off the top of my head. They're in our long memo on law firms' use of the cloud and Google Apps in particular. There's been plenty of folks have addressed this, and just using an outside vendor doesn't waive privilege. Otherwise, frankly, you would have been waiving privilege since the first time you ever sent an email about a client.
Yeah. Great. Terrific. Thanks, Jeff. So one or two last considerations here. You want to think through what is the impact of an outage. So as we're thinking through, so basically we're thinking through the considerations of how much you should invest in security considerations. Remember that availability is also part of these considerations. So you want to think through the what would be lost if you couldn't get to your data for half an hour? What would be lost if you couldn't get to your data for 3 days? And this is the type of place where you've really got kind of a risk-reward type or a risk impact assessment type setup, because you probably, so having a setup that is going to, it's guaranteed not to be down for an hour over the course of a year is going to be incredibly expensive, basically any way that you try to go about it. But it's probably not going to be a huge impact on you if you can't get to your data for an hour. However, if you can't get to your data for a week, that's obviously a different matter. So trying to think through where those lines are for you is an important thing to consider as well. So, and then just thinking about all of these things from an on-site perspective as well as a cloud perspective. So we talked about some of these before. So have you recently checked whether your systems have been patched? Have you done a systems penetration test? So that means exactly what it sounds like. So the idea of so basically somebody attempting to penetrate your systems to see whether they can. Have you done employee training on security procedures? So as Jeff mentioned, one of the biggest risks here is that I call up staff members, I pretend to be somebody who ought to have, I pretend to be at the vendor and I need their password in order to do this maintenance thing, and I'm able to convince somebody at your organization to give me their password. That is actually one of the biggest vulnerabilities for any system. So it's an important thing to think through. And I'm thinking about backup and recovery. So is your data backed up? And have you actually tested bringing it back to make sure that you actually can? It's easy to get into these kind of routines of, all right, our data is in fact automatically backed up, but then you don't realize that something's gone wrong because you are not regularly testing your backup. So if you're not regularly doing all of these things, it is actually quite likely that you'd increase your security by moving to the cloud. And Jeff, I know, has done a substantial analysis of this for his own firm, and that's what he found, that by moving specifically to Google Apps, that they could increase security. Jeff, you want to talk about that?
Well, part of you probably have, let's just say, folks who are not all exactly on the same board with compliance as well. And no, the cloud isn't the only way to have a centralized system, but at least for us, it got everyone on the same platform so we could do password monitoring and that sort of thing. And then just, by its collaborative nature, let's say a lot of the cloud tools encourage storing files somewhere where you can get to them, let's say from home, rather than carrying around USB sticks. So I would actually add to your list, do your staff always report when they lose a USB stick? Do they know to report immediately if they use a laptop? So by using cloud tools that are really good at supporting collaboration, you also reduce the amount of times that really sensitive files get toted around in ways that can be lost and used by the bad guys.
Absolutely. Great. And William has added also another great thing to add to the list. Is it encrypted? So we're going to talk a little bit about encryption in just a second, but yes, that is definitely something to think about for sensitive data. Great. Jeff, anything else to add? So as you were thinking through kind of the investment in security versus the risk of actual problems, how did you guys kind of think through, how did you manage that kind of calculus of thinking through what it was worth to you?
I think part of it was in staff, frankly. I think we're not that big of a program. We cover 14 counties, but we have about 100 employees. And just talking, there is no statewide program in New York, but talking to some of my peers, it looked to me like we were going to need 1.5 people approximately to run an internal network that I felt met all these requirements and standards and was secure, and someone who literally just read security bulletins and stayed up on those things and said, oh my goodness, there's a new vulnerability, and instantly, because I don't believe in 9 to 5 with things like this, is going to apply the patch to protect us. That looked like a really substantial investment where, the tools that were available in the cloud were just straight up free. And I felt like, now don't get me wrong, I didn't get the managers and to give me the same amount of staff to just do training and support, but I would have just rather put that money into training and support and other kinds of security analysis rather than running the infrastructure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and as, Jeff, I think you quoted Kate in saying just the idea that as opposed to like how many security experts do you have on staff compared to the experts that might be on staff at some of these cloud places. So thinking through, you know, it doesn't make sense to make your organization to give expertise in data security compared to outsourcing that expertise to somebody else.
Right.
Great. Questions on kind of how to think about kind of how much to invest in this area before we've got two more sections. We're going to walk through kind of the nitty-gritty of security. So if you had infinite security, what security that would be. And then we're going to wind up by talking about how you would know whether a cloud vendor actually has what of those security measures they would take. Any questions before we dive into those rounds? All right. So let us talk about kind of the ideal multi-level security model. So if you had unlimited time and resources and you wanted to make your data as secure as you could possibly make it, which again is never going to be perfectly secure, but will be certainly at this point impractical to penetrate for almost anybody. So what would be included in this, you know, ultimate security model? So you ideally want to have not just one or two levels of security, but you want to have different kinds of security to protect your data. And we're going to walk through all of these one by one. So you've got the idea of the physical security. So this is guards with guns. You know, this is keeping people from walking off with your server or inserting a USB. You've got network security to keep people from entering into your whole network of computers. You've got transmission security to make sure that data as it's moving is protected. You've got control over who actually has access to get to the data. And then lastly, you have the data itself is encrypted and protected where it is. So let's go through those. So physical security. So you've got protection of your stuff. So people can't smash it or take it. That if the power goes down, there is redundancy. So that you don't lose all your data if you lose the physical server that the data is sitting on. So things like that. You've got the idea of network security. So this is keeping people. So this is kind of actually that you could think of this as side by side with the physical security. So you have the actual prevention of people physically, you know, mashing your computers, and then you've got the security of people electronically entering into your network. So the idea of preventing people from intruding, detection. So at least if someone gets into your network, you know that they've gotten into your network. So the primary way that this is done on most networks is firewalls. So to make sure that data is sitting behind a firewall. And proactive antivirus stuff. So a key way to get through network security is through the insertion of like Trojan horses and stuff like that, which would be mostly, I mean, so nothing is ever 100%, but mostly precluded through antivirus protection.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that if you're not an expert in those things and you're setting it up for your program, the LS Tech list has some really awesome, well-informed folks who can help you do a good job of setting up your firewall to do all these things.
Yep. Yeah. So this is actually, so it sounds like a lot here, but this particular layer is actually a pretty well understood and commonly implemented layer of security. So this is actually probably not prohibitive to have on site, as opposed to some of the other things that we're going to be talking about. Guards with guns being one of them. So you want to think about also, so you've got the data coming out the door here. Is the data encrypted while it's moving? So this is actually something that people often miss, or not often miss, but is not often top of mind as they're thinking about security. So this is ideas of, so we have data going from one system to another. So our case management system is talking to a separate constituent management system. What is happening to the data while it is being moved from one place to another? Is it encrypted in that case? Is the network over which it's being transmitted actually secured? Email is kind of the classic case of you've got information in transit that is very much not secure. So the email is notoriously unsecured and easy to hack. So it's important to think about regular email as simply an unsecure way to send any kind of sensitive information.
Right. This is one of my favorite topics right now is encryption, because it's just so frustrating that we don't have very good tools to do this yet. You can force an HTTPS connection, for instance, with Google Apps, which is great, and should help with man-in-the-middle attacks, and should scramble the data so it's at least not clearly readable by someone trying to listen in. But I would really love for a great solution to come out there that our users will actually use to encrypt those, to always encrypt those things that are a little bit more sensitive. There are some tools. I think Brian Rowe, you suggested one that led me to another one. I'm trying to think what it's called. Cloud Store. There are some drag and drop encryption gizmos out there now, some of which integrate with some Google products, which I like. I also recently discovered, that the built-in Microsoft Word encryptor in the later versions, although it's a 3-step process, you can encrypt right from Word with some decent-looking strength. So I think this is the key to the future, is encryption that our staff will actually use, so that even if someone does bump up against your data or find it somewhere, they have to really want it to sit down and crack it and read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There was some encryption stuff that was in the 50 tech tips from the EJC slides that I put in there. The other thing is, William has pointed out that what we're really covering here is the OSI model framework, which is over the different levels and areas where you really have to consider security. And the link that he's got here to Wikipedia on it basically takes and explains and goes into a lot more detail for people interested in more information. We'll add that into the blog post that we put up online, and I'll also put that into the chat generally.
Absolutely. Yes, and that's an excellent point. So I certainly don't mean to imply that we have invented any of the security information. What we're going through, in fact, is a fairly common, often called an onion security model of just a multi-layer security. So we've got this fancy castle to help you visualize it, but it is a very much a commonly and widely used model of security.
Yeah, and Jeffrey points out that they use TrueCrypt on drives that leave the office, and they also use encryption for their USB drives. And we, at Northwest Justice Project, we've done both software encryption directly on USB drives, and also USB drives that have keypad lock to get into them, so that hardware level also.
Wait, who said they use TrueCrypt? Who was that?
Jeffrey.
Well, I love
Kaplan?
TrueCrypt, but anybody, I want to hear more from someone who has their frontline workers using TrueCrypt. I mean, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. I think it's a great product. It's so great. I wonder if the CIA was actually behind it and to get us all to use it. But talk about not user friendly.
I've unmuted Jeffrey here. If he can talk about that a little bit,
Yeah.
he's definitely welcome to.
Jeff, we used TrueCrypt on a laptop that would be going off-site so that we could have an encrypted partition that somebody could save stuff on. Really, it's the only laptop that we use that would have actual client information that's allowed to leave the building.
Wow. Well, I like it. That sounds very secure. But but your users have figured out how to use TrueCrypt to open an archive and then save stuff to it and then close the archive.
Yeah, it's only been like 4 months worth of training, but we got there.
Right,
which is a very important point. Is the transactional cost on some of these can be very
Absolutely.
high.
Great. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yeah, and that's the point that Brian just made is a really important one. That, like everything, there are there are costs to you can make it way more secure, and there might be money involved there, or the more secure it is, the harder it is for your own staff who are supposed to have access to it get into it, likely. So there's always going to be issues there. And a question from Cassandra. What software do you use for USB encryption? Jeffrey or Jeff, do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, Brian Rowe actually was talking about one that I thought sounded great of hardware-based encryption on a USB stick. I think that might be the best example.
Yeah, HS Security Stick is the hardware-based one that we ended up going with. And one of the things that we liked about it is that it allows for 2 different access keys, one for an administrator and one for the individual user. One of the others that we used only had a user set password, and once somebody had lost that password, there wasn't a way to save it. That's on the hardware side. I'm going to pull up my slides and double check what we used on the software side, and I'll let you know in a minute.
And William, can you are still unmuted. Can you just talk a little bit about your approach? Sounds like you're doing a fair amount in this realm through your chats here.
Let me get to the...
William?
Yeah, hold on. Can you hear me now?
I can.
Yep.
All right, let me get you off a speakerphone. Hold on a second. I had you.
had us muted.
There we go. I got you on speakerphone. We don't attempt to train our end users on encryption and decryption. We really just encrypt the whole drive, and by virtue of their authenticating to the laptop, they're allowed access to that encrypted data. Our big fear, especially with mobile devices, whether it's a smartphone or a USB or a laptop, is that that device gets stolen or left in a taxi on a conference. That's the real thing we're trying to mitigate. We're not trying to make it difficult for the attorneys to get to the data that they need. We're just simply making it difficult for the bad people to get to that client data after the fact.
And you mentioned IronKey as a core software you're using.
Well, they were talking about some USBs that are already some USB sticks that are already hardened, and there's several out there that are already encrypted, and IronKey is just one of the names that I've seen floating around the literature in terms of a device that has been designed to encrypt and decrypt data on a USB.
Yep. And you've also mentioned in the chat here, you're full of good tips here, that Windows 7 Ultimate allows full hard drive encryption. Is that something that you're using?
We're playing with it now. And we really want to encrypt the whole drive because you can encrypt a partition, but it doesn't keep the end user from saving a Word document somewhere that's not encrypted. So we'd much rather encrypt the entire drive. We're starting to look at, I don't know that Android yet supports, or the iPhone yet supports SSD or flash encryption yet at the OS level, but that's another one of our big fears, is that we're going to get an attorney or a paralegal with a smartphone with some client data on it.
I think, though, these are all great, and I'm at the other end of the spectrum. I'd say I don't want any USB sticks ever because I don't trust people to only use the hardened ones. But when you move that to the cloud, and these are all great ideas, I think I'm leaning towards saying I want you to use software encryption for special sensitive stuff so that I don't have to rely on hardware encrypted lily pads along the way, but it's definitely raises some issues.
I mean, I don't know that we want to leave it up to the end user to make that determination.
Right. I understand both philosophies, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, in fact, Jeff's making the point is that through cloud solutions, you can potentially lessen the need for carrying the data around because instead they can access it on a browser from wherever they're trying to go. Jeff, is that accurate?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's certainly, it probably is not going to replace entirely the need for moving the data physically, but it might be a solution, a piece of the solution. Great. Let us just crank through some other pieces of this. So we're talking about a multi-layer security model. We've covered here both transmission security, and let me point out, I'm just going to actually skip a slide for a second. We've also just talked considerably about data protection. So encryption is, you want to think about encryption of the data at rest, and then encryption of data on the move. And then also when you're thinking about encryption and data encryption, you also want to think about the idea of backup and restoring. So basically, if a user deletes data, for instance, accidentally or purposefully, can you get it back? So if you lose the whole server, can you get it back? The ability to actually get rid of deleted data is an interesting question. So often data appears to be deleted, but is not actually deleted. And if that is important to you, you want to make sure that you can actually get rid of it off of your own server or cloud servers. And then the idea of the ability to throw your body into the breach, which is off-referenced, but as Jeff has pointed out, probably not a major consideration here. So this is actually the innermost circle of our security model. There's one that's between the security control, the transmission control, and the data protection, which is the idea of access controls. So ensuring that people who aren't supposed to have, so they've gotten through the network, but just because they're in the network doesn't mean they should have access to that data. So ensuring that your temp can't get into the confidential client records. Making sure that the right people have physical access to the server. So also, well, they may not be able to get in with a password, but they can just dump the entire contents of everything onto a USB drive. That's still not access control. And then training, as we've talked about a lot, on appropriate passwords and security measures. So that is let me just back up so we can see the full picture again. So that is the kind of the ideal security model, all of the different aspects that you would want to include if you had unlimited time and money. And you can see here how that including all of this is going to be a big expenditure and require considerable expertise on the part of a nonprofit. So the idea of data in the cloud is that, in fact, a lot of this can be outsourced so that you can potentially not have to worry about the intricate details of all of those things, but instead to worry at the high level about finding a vendor who knows what they're doing, which is what we're about to speak to. So any questions on any of that detail in terms of what one should be or what one ideally would be thinking about in the world of security before we talk specifically about vendors?
I don't know, did we talk about how long you keep stuff as well?
We haven't. Do you want to take that on?
Not just for a second. It's also worth thinking about how long things should exist in your possession. There's some programs that keep data forever, and some that are trying to do electronic purging. And there's some thought that if you get a data breach and there's 10,000, 20,000 social security numbers in there, that you might have to find a way to compensate or notify all those folks. So we're thinking about how long you keep everything, whether it's in the cloud or local.
Interesting. Great.
Yeah, something to strongly consider in there also is what your local ESI rules for discovery, electronically stored information rules for discovery look like, and federally, some have safe harbor provisions around having processes where you purge data on a regular basis. Others do not. That's something that's being debated currently in the state of Washington. So.
And what are the practical implications of that for a nonprofit, Brian? What would someone want to decide or not decide based on that those policies?
Well, I mean, from a practical perspective, it may encourage you to put together some type of a routine process where data is eliminated on a regular basis so that you don't have the long-term cost of securing that data beyond when it's useful to you. So there could be some cost saving. Also, it's an opportunity to make some proactive policy decisions around what those should be for your organization.
Perfect. Great. Fabulous. Let's talk about what to look for in a vendor. So the first thing is, so obviously there is a huge amount going on so we've talked through, and in fact, we could certainly get way more granular and spend an entire hour and a half probably talking about each level of each facet of that security. So it's likely not practical to determine whether the vendor is doing everything they could conceivably be doing on all of these different facets. However, it certainly is practical to make sure that they have some documentation about all of these facets, and if you ask questions about it, the staff can talk about it intelligently. Certainly, it is a bad sign if you ask a question about data encryption and the person doesn't either have the answer or say, well, let me hook you up with, XY, our security guy, and he'll answer all your security questions. Because for any vendor, any cloud vendor, these security questions should be old hat, and they should have very good answers for them. So it's not necessarily a sign that they are doing everything that they should do just because they talk the good talk. But if they don't talk the good talk, then that is certainly a cause for concern. You also want to think about uptime, and uptime is something that likely there is some documentation or discussion of. And Mike is asking a question, which is actually a great question. So is there a rating or seal of approval for vendors? Ought there to be? So yes, I definitely agree there ought to be, and there is kind of. We're going to talk about in just a second a couple of certifications that vendors might have. That you can look for. Uptime. Sorry, I interrupted myself in the middle of this here. So thinking about how much, so uptime is the opposite of downtime. So the idea that if you have your data in Google Apps, how much of the time will you know that you'll be able to get to your data, and how much downtime might you expect? So this is generally measured in nines, just historically, or just traditionally. So you might have 99% uptime guaranteed. That's actually a pretty bad uptime. That means that 1% of the time when you go to get your data will be down. So something like 99.9, or what's called the 4 nines, 99.99% of the time, are better uptimes. So the idea here is, again, that you're never going to find the vendor who's always up at every moment. And in fact, that's also true of your own systems, that you are likely going to lose your own server for, some amount of time because something happens at some point. So this is a matter of thinking through what can they tell you, or what can they promise you. This could be something that goes in a terms of service for your agreement with the vendor, in terms of what they're committed to, and with actual penalties if they are down more than they promise you to be down. And just to point out here that, was trying to point out and instead I clicked. So your connection to the internet might well be the weak link here in your uptime figure. So even if Google Apps is up 100% of the time, your internet connection might not be up 100% of the time. So you'll need to think through that as well.
Yeah, and the more you use off-site resources, the more attention you need to pay to having plenty of bandwidth and a really solid network to reach out and use those resources.
Absolutely. Actually,
right.
one
This
more
is something
thing.
that definitely comes up with our web-based case management system. Is that the case management system is up, but occasionally we'll have an office that will lose internet entirely. So the internet access needs to be calculated into that uptime when using the cloud.
Yep, absolutely. And another consideration here is amount of planned downtime. So generally, when a vendor gives you uptime figures, so all right, we're going to guarantee you 4 nines of uptime. That doesn't include planned maintenance. So you want to understand what their plans are around maintenance to make sure that they're not ridiculous. So you'll typically, like so for instance, Salesforce, a pretty widely used cloud constituent relationship management tool, has planned downtime, which is probably once a month on Sunday morning about 3:00 a.m. So that's pretty reasonable, and there's not a lot of people. Certainly, it doesn't concern me that it's down at 3:00 a.m. on Sunday. But you want to make sure that it's not like a day a week will be down for planned downtime. You want to think about the terms of service, and this becomes a fairly complicated thing to think about in the so in the world of especially the big cloud vendors like Google. So you want to make sure that you understand what is in the terms of service. So what's there in terms of privacy and the use of your data? Like, so no reputable cloud vendor should actually be using your data or giving themselves permission to publish your data. It tends to be difficult to, probably easier for you guys who have lawyers on staff, presumably, but it tends to be difficult to wade through the contracts because there's often, the vendors will give themselves fairly wide latitude to the data for the purposes of maintaining the data and the ability to actually, like for instance, give themselves the right to show you your own data. So looking carefully to try to understand what's there. And then also understanding what they're allowed to do in terms of changing their terms of service on the fly. Google Apps, for instance, recently had a change in their terms of service, and they did, in fact, they are required to by their terms of service and did notify everybody that the terms of service had changed. But that's also a potential downside of using a cloud service, that this has suddenly happened. The terms of service has changed. We now need to, one, make the time to understand and know whether this is something we should care about, and then two, with the possibility that it is something we care about, something potentially has just changed that makes a big difference to us, and that means, wow, maybe we should be looking for a new vendor. So the fact that things can change without you doing anything is potentially a downside of using a cloud solution. Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about terms of service from a lawyer's perspective?
Yeah, I think, well, for one thing, it's really dangerous to think because you're a lawyer or you talk like one or watch a lot of TV shows that you can read the terms of service or, for vendors or credit cards, for instance, and be confident that you know what it means. There was so much misinterpretation of the Google terms of service, for instance, where people weren't really familiar with the idea that sometimes they have to have what sounds like overly broad access in order to do things like you said, like show you your own data when they're troubleshooting. So That said, really when you're talking about really huge vendors, it's sort of a contract of adhesion. You're not really going to negotiate terms with them, and that's a risk that you face. I think really even with smaller vendors, though, other than how comfortable you feel with them, it really doesn't come into play until you want to leave or somebody wants to sue you for breaking rules. And as far as you wanting to leave, none of us, I think, really want to get into litigation with any of our providers. So I really, to save time and consternation, I frankly look at the terms of service more from the perspective of, am I comfortable with this provider? Can I bail and keep my data? And what would happen if somebody else said I was being unethical by using them, or we actually were part of a lawsuit? How would an intelligent attorney who had experience in this field read these? So that's the tack I take. And then for the smaller ones, it's not that hard to make a little addendum. And if any of you do that, feel free to use. I'll send you mine that I made up, and William probably has one. Brian may have one. We're kind of making it up here. If somebody actually hires an outside firm to draw one, that's fine, but in general, I think most of them just write a bunch of gobbledygook.
Yeah, these are incredibly often poorly written contracts, and there's an incentive for them to be very long in nature, and often the companies that you're dealing with may not even know what are in their own terms of service when you're dealing with smaller vendors.
Yeah. Terrific. So, yeah, it sounds like, in fact, anybody who's willing to share their addendum to terms of service or things to look at in terms of service, I think that would be incredibly valuable. If you want to send them to me or Brian, I'll certainly forward them to the group. And in fact, I think those would be very useful to the wider nonprofit audience. I'd love to have those to share with other folks as well.
Definitely.
Great. Terrific. A few more considerations. So there was a question in regard to like a housekeeping seal of approval for vendors. Here's a couple of things that you can look for that will help to give you confidence without looking through all the nitty-gritty. So the issue in this space is that unless a vendor is very large, it tends to, these are not things that they would necessarily have, so that it might not apply, like HIPAA, which we're going to talk about, or it might be expensive to get, like the certifications we're going to talk about. So the fact that they don't have them doesn't necessarily mean they are not secure, but if they do have them, that can give you a lot of confidence. So the first one is HIPAA. So this is HIPAA obviously doesn't apply to you guys, but throughout the whole nonprofit space, if a vendor is supporting a lot of organizations that need to be compliant with HIPAA, that can give you confidence that they are doing things that are very compatible with good security measures. Because HIPAA is actually it's actually very similar to the model rules that the ABA is talking about. That basically you're required to do reasonable things, and reasonable things has been pretty specifically interpreted to be a bunch of security measures. And here is two possible actual certifications that a vendor could have. So SAS 70 or SSAE 16. So Statement on Accounting Standards 70, Statement of Standards for Attestation Engagement 16. So these are basically process. So it's an audit process that a vendor can go through in order to be certified that they are have a high degree of security. So this is something that you wouldn't expect a smaller vendor. So most vendors, for instance, that specialize in the nonprofit space, like so legal case management vendors, I'd be really surprised if there were folks who had taken, maybe in the legal management space, legal space, people take the time and the money to do this. But if someone has done this, then you can be pretty confident. If they haven't, then you're kind of left thinking about the other things that we talked about.
Well, and you've got a little cover too, right? Like, how much do we really know? How many times you walk around your office and make sure that anybody who might have sensitive information has padlocked the file cabinets in their office? Do you do that every night before you go home? It's hard to know, but it certainly gives you cover if you end up in a lawsuit, for instance.
Yep. Yeah, so certainly this kind of certification, I would think, would give you completely airtight coverage for due diligence, because in fact this standard, body of certification has certified them. So yes, unfortunately that it doesn't apply to a vast amount of vendors in our space. And not that it doesn't apply, but simply they haven't spent the money to do it. There's also a specific regulatory compliance called PCI DSS, which is Payment Card Industry Payment Data Security Standard. So if you are storing credit card numbers, then by the agreement with credit card companies, you or your vendor, whoever is storing these credit cards, needs to be compliant with PCI DSS. So that's just a good check. So if someone is storing it and doesn't immediately know that they are PCI DSS compliant, that's definitely a red flag. By the way, PCI DSS is very, so it's very secure. It involves, so basically it precludes you from storing credit card numbers on any computer which is continuously connected to the internet. So it is very unlikely that you can effectively be compliant in your own organization, so on your own server. So a good reason to not be storing credit cards on your own server. All right, so that was overall vendor considerations. Things to add, Jeff, or other folks on the phone, things that people should be looking for in order to evaluate vendors?
Well, I think, we got off onto security for a while, and understandably so. Also, I think sometimes security becomes a little bit of a game where it's like, I know what this latest threat is and a way to address it. It also kind of feeds on itself, the conversation. I think, although we're using the cloud and I'm happy to do it, I would also be happy if the resources showed up to run a state-of-the-art data center here, and if Microsoft had come up with better collaborative tools earlier, I'd probably be okay with that. So I'm not sure, I'm not really a Google Apps fanboy, although I've been accused of it. But there, I think everyone needs to weigh what information they store in the cloud, what information they send by email. There's one program that says thou shalt not send client information by email ever, and I bet you nobody's complying. So I just encourage people to, occasionally be skeptical about the sky is falling, folks, and with every point, ask yourself, so what? So what if that happened? What is the real result, the real harm to the client, real liabilities for my office? And then, compare those results to the resources that would be required to prevent every possible data breach. And then also look at, prioritization. We can't do everything, so the reasonable person does need to step in and deal with these problems, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, and actually that was a terrific summary of my summary. So let me just very quickly walk through my summary, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions or comments. So basically, there is nothing specifically about the cloud that makes data more or less secure. So the data is as safe as you or a vendor is making it. So you need to understand, as Jeff said, what the value of your data is, what's it worth to you, to others, and what measures are practical and appropriate. Vendors can make your data really safe, but not all vendors are created equal, and you need to consider that. And you also need to weigh that against what you can practically do in-house. So I basically just reiterated Jeff's great closing there. Terrific. Other thoughts on this whole realm of what this practically means to a nonprofit? Questions on any topic or comments? William, I'm curious, you've clearly been thinking about this a lot from your organization's perspective. Can you just tell us a little about how kind of you weighed the different factors here, so to think about where your time and money was best spent in terms of security?
If it were only that easy. I mean, it's we're looking at it from a practical risk assessment perspective. I mean, it's the same reason we buy insurance as a risk mitigation mechanism, and we're just simply, as a statewide organization, trying to put processes in place that will help to mitigate those risks. I mean, if anybody saw the IG's letter that came out a couple months ago, I think we're going to end up, I think my sense is, in the not too distant future, if it hasn't happened already, that our primary funders, be them LSC or other organizations, are going to start requiring some level of compliance. So this is something that's going to hit the bottom line. I think is going to hit the bottom line for most nonprofits, because your grantors are going to start requiring some level of basic competency as it relates to this kind of risk.
Absolutely. Great. And Mike has a great question. Are there issues to discuss with your liability carrier? Jeff, can you take that on?
Yeah, our conclusion is no. The truth is, I mean, honestly, if you can tell, I sometimes get a little frustrated. Once you start using the internet, you're using resources that you don't control. I don't really think that the difference between having, there's a big spectrum from that server sitting in your office to that server sitting in another office using a VPN to that server sitting in a hosted location connected to your office via VPN, and then taking the extra step of using the public internet with some kind of encryption to transfer the data. So I think the answer is no so far. I think, frankly, I think they're more likely to ask us about electronically stored information and discovery when one of us gets sued and we can't produce emails from a supervisor to a supervisee, 2 years, that started 2 years ago. So I think that's far less likely than someone trying to parse an ethical opinion about whether storing a complaint on a cloud provider that somebody hacked into violated ethical rules and exposed you to some crazy liability, in part because what's the damages? Yeah. So no.
Great.
I definitely want to point out that David Bonebrink has shared a link here to the Office of Inspector General's LSC memo on preventing information security breaches. It's a short 4-page document, but it covers some similar things to what we've brought up here, and it is actually a very short, easy, quick read. I definitely recommend checking it out.
Great. And we'll include that as well. We have a resources page that's going out. We'll include that in the resources page. Thanks, David. Michael has another great question. What happens when your vendor goes out of business and you want your data back? Are there concerns that vendors keep data in a unique format that can't be used elsewhere? So, absolutely. So this is not. So I didn't think it's not necessarily a security question, but is definitely a key consideration when thinking about cloud vendors versus installed vendors. You want to, if you're using a cloud solution, you definitely want to make sure, as Jeff has mentioned, that you can get your data out. So if you want to leave, for instance, the data can be gotten. And you want to make sure that you are actually backing your data up so that you are able to get your data out, and you do get your data out on some kind of periodic basis. So in the unlikely event that the data would simply disappear, that the vendor disappears without letting you get your data, you have your data. Depending on what the data is, it's possible that you're going to have some trouble moving it from one vendor to another, and that's going to be another consideration to keep in mind. So this is a realm in which an installed solution, so something on your own server, does definitely have an advantage. that you can't. I mean, well, you could lose your whole server. But your own, unless you go out of business, your server is not going out of business, so you have it.
True, true, but I'm not sure the distinction is quite that great. If you're using a particular piece of software to do your bankruptcy filings and you've got several going and they go out of business and don't do the latest updates to prepare the right paperwork, you got a little bit of a problem. If you've been storing, if you own software locally and you've been storing everything in, you know, WordPerfect and they finally kick the bucket, you know, is Microsoft going to do a good job of interpreting that data? I don't know. So it's not really unique. Not really. It's exaggerated a little bit with offsite vendors of any kind, but it's a problem we face with every piece of software.
Right. Yes, I think so that's a great point. I think it is a little bit more in terms of offsite software when it comes to like things like constituent data, because your software your software vendor for an install could go out of business, but that doesn't mean the software itself goes away off your servers. But certainly, so you at least would have a little more time to move it. But absolutely.
Right, and there's definitely groups that are working on the issue of data portability, generally in creating open, accessible formats that can be moved from one service to another. And most of your strong cloud providers will also provide you some type of a function or way to download and move your data from one provider to another. For example, all of the major email services out there that are cloud-based will let you export all of your contacts and all of your mail messages and then move those into, at least the contacts, into another service and your mail messages offline. If you're looking at a smaller vendor, asking them about data portability is very important.
Terrific. All right, so we have reached the end of our time, and I think we've actually reached the end of our questions. Maybe, Brian, shall we do an official wrap-up, and then we can stick around a little bit if people have more questions? How's that sound to you?
Definitely.
Great. So thank you all very much for attending. It's a great session. Thanks to all for participating to such an extent and asking questions and giving comments. It's been a pleasure to doing webinars with you so far, and we're excited to continue on down the road. Speaking of which, Brian, I think that we have one coming up next month, yeah?
Yes, we have one on the 1st of next month on Tech to Help Self-Assisted Assist Self-Represented Individuals, and then we have one the following month on online intake. We'll have more information up here in the next week on how to register for those. This video should also be up within the next week online, along with a blog post hopefully in the coming day or so. Thank you all for attending.
Great, thank you.
Thanks all so much. Talk to you soon.